Increasing violence, Northwest D.C. has a string of violent robberies in the area over the past week, but are the crimes connected?
And new talking escalators? Find out what prompted Metro to make the escalators verbal. District Wire News starts right now.
Good evening, I'm Afra Abdullah.
And I'm Adisa Hargit Robinson. Wesley Theological Seminary in Northwest Washington is giving tips on how to stay safe from criminals. The recent increase in robberies in the area has business owners and residents on the lookout. Craig Cannon has more on the story.
Residents in Northwest D.C. are receiving warnings to stay alert due to a rise in armed robberies this week. Police are investigating 3 armed robberies that were reported late Friday night in upper Northwest Washington and a 4th holdup in Montgomery County. Police say one robbery happened just before midnight on the 3500 block of Connecticut Avenue. Joey Allen, who is the events manager for the District Restaurant Group at Jack's American Grill, says he is alarmed about the increase in robberies, but it is not a total shock.
Working and living in upper Northwest, there are times when I see people walking at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the streets are still busy. Those are main arteries, Massachusetts, Wisconsin, Connecticut. So I'm shocked that it's happening, but also at the same time I know that, they're pretty busy.
Residents have been seeing an increase in alerts about robberies in the area. Monica Petty, who is the housing director at Wesley, says she advises those in the area to be alert at all times.
Making sure that you try not to have expensive items visible. That can sometimes make someone be a target.
Police say they think the same robber has committed all 4 acts. No injuries were reported during either incident. American University is warning the community to travel in groups, especially at night, and to utilize the escort services on campus when traveling alone. Craig Cannon, District Wire News.
The role of the media is being questioned during the President Trump's administration. Some White House correspondents were left out of a press briefing on Friday. Grace Galvin reports.
Reporters from 5 different news outlets were excluded from a news gaggle at the White House on Friday. John Watson, a communications law professor from American University, says this is highly unusual.
Using a gaggle or calling a gaggle for matters of general interest is unusual. It's exclusionary and it's punitive.
Investigative journalism professor Charles Lewis says this administration's treatment of the media is unprecedented. He says the attitude towards the press poses a danger to the First Amendment.
A lot of folks are not usually keen on the media, particularly his base, and so he's trying to gin up resentment and anger, and that's when press freedom is endangered, and that's why the Committee to Protect Journalists is increasing their budget substantially, and they now realize the press is endangered here in the United States, of all places.
AP and Times reporters who were included in Friday's gaggle chose not to attend in protest, but Watson says he would advise otherwise.
The proper course of action would have been to show up and give it to everybody. You're not separate businesses. You're journalists. You have one solid, unified mission. And if someone seeks to break you apart, you can't boycott it. Your responsibility to the public remains. You have to go gather the news.
Press Secretary Sean Spicer says this gaggle was not meant to exclude journalists. Grace Galvin, Washington.
President Trump is scheduled to address a joint session of Congress tomorrow. It is not a State of the Union address, which are traditionally given after at least 1 year in office. White House officials have suggested that this speech will use a lighter tone than the president's inaugural. The president is expected to talk about immigration, tax cuts, deregulation, repealing the Affordable Care Act, and call for an increase in defense and security spending.
President Trump's pick for Navy Secretary Philip Bilden withdrew from consideration late Sunday. Bilden said in a statement that he would not be able to satisfy ethics requirements without causing significant problems for his family's investments. He gave no specific details on the nature of the issues, but said he fully supports President Trump's plan to modernize the Navy and Marine Corps. Bilden is the second White House nominee to withdraw due to potential conflicts of interest.
Last Wednesday, the Trump administration reversed President Obama's guidance on transgender bathrooms in public schools. Students had been allowed to use bathrooms that correspond to their gender identity. Now they must use the one that corresponds to their birth gender. Catherine Warren has more on how this change is affecting local schools.
The Trump administration is withdrawing federal protections for transgender students in public schools. Across the country, transgender students were afforded the opportunity to use bathrooms and facilities that correspond with their gender identity. In a statement, the new administration issued a letter to public schools stating that previous guidance did not provide extensive legal analysis consistent with Title IX. Many Americans are divided on the Trump administration decisions throughout his short presidency thus far, and this issue is no different. Those in favor of the withdrawal say that the federal government never should have been involved in this issue. Those opposing the withdrawal say that it is unfair and just another vicious attack by President Trump. Sophomore American University student Emma Haas says she completely opposes this withdrawal.
I completely disagree with him rescinding it. I think that no matter who you are, you should be able to use whatever bathroom you feel comfortable in, and I think that there should be a protection against that.
The letter comes on the heels of a potential Supreme Court case involving a transgender teen from Virginia. It is expected that oral arguments in this case will be heard on March 28th. Catherine Warren, Washington.
Mac Beggs, a 17-year-old high school wrestler in Texas, won the girls' state championship in the 110 weight class. Beggs identifies as a male and is currently transitioning, but was not allowed to compete against boys. Texas state sport regulations require athletes to compete according to their birth gender. Texas is one of 7 U.S. states with policies categorized by transgender advocates as discriminatory towards student athletes.
A Jewish cemetery, a mosque, and a slashing have all raised suspicion of being motivated by a hate crime. Kelvin Henry in a Flash Studio has more.
Now, it seems like every other day there are new things that are happening affecting different groups, different populations, and even in different states. But they all have one thing in common. They are being investigated as hate crimes. City to city, there are crimes many residents feel are motivated by hate. A mosque fire in Tampa and a vandalized gravesite at a Jewish cemetery have all been cause for concern. American University students and staff say there are reasons behind the spike in potential hate crimes. American University student Rebecca Feldman says the recent crimes have affected her.
I mean, personally, the St. Louis one, the Philly one, all of the ones that happened before that made me very angry. I did something that I don't usually do, which is the whole post on Facebook, rant a little bit, just because especially Philly's super close to home. I'm Jewish. That was kind of all of my family lives there. Who do I know that was buried there? What temple was that? So a lot of that hit really close to home for me. But it just kind of...
Hate crimes are defined as crimes motivated by racial, religious, sexual, or other prejudices. President Obama signed the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act in 2010 to combat such violence. Many believe, including American University professor Chris Simpson, that the Trump administration is partially to blame.
Are a sign of deep illness and bad leadership in Washington, D.C.
Okay. American University professor Angie Chuang, who is an expert on racial issues, believes that the future of hate crimes in America depends on politicians' response to it.
I think that the environment a year from now will depend very much on what public officials do in terms of speaking out and even calling things hate crimes. One of the incidents that really concerns me is the shooting in Kansas of Indian immigrants, in which the shooter said, "Go back to your country," or "Go back where you came from," right before shooting. And it appeared that the federal government was slow to call it a hate crime or was reluctant to call it a hate crime. And I feel like that we have to call things for what they obviously seem to be.
Now, many groups differ on the reasons that lead to what's going on now. But one thing that they all agree on is that we must end what's happening. Kelvin Henry, District Wire News.
A man accused of driving a truck into a Mardi Gras crowd is being held on bail in New Orleans. Police say 25-year-old Nelson Rizzuto had a blood alcohol level of nearly 3 times the legal limit when his truck plowed through the crowd. 21 people were hospitalized with non-life-threatening injuries. 7 more refused medical transportation.
The 89th Academy Awards will likely be remembered not for the night's big winners, but for a big mix-up. Presenters Faye Dunaway announced that La La Land had won Best Picture, but it hadn't.
Not a joke. Moonlight has won Best Picture. Moonlight, Best Picture.
PricewaterhouseCoopers handles the ballot counting and gave Dunaway the wrong envelope. The company has apologized, and the casting and producers of both movies.
This year's Oscars seen an increase in diversity in categories. There were 7 nominations for actors and actresses of color, including a win by Viola Davis for her role in Fences and Mahershala Ali for his work in Moonlight. This marks the most black winners ever in the Oscars history and comes during the Academy's #OscarsSoWhite campaign, launched in January 2016.
Actor Bill Paxton passed away over the weekend after complications following heart surgery. Paxton's Hollywood career spanned over 40 years. He rose to fame in the 90s with roles in True Lies, Titanic, Aliens, and Twister. Paxton is best known for his lead roles in Big Love and Training Day. He was 61.
Coming up, an increase in escalator accidents has Metro trying out a new approach. Find out what they're doing and try to keep the escalator safe.
And a DC elementary school reopens today. Find out why the school had to shut down for 3 weeks. Stay with us.